Okay, we're starting to see some folks rolling in here, so we're going to get started. To start off with, I just want to say thanks everybody for taking some time to hop on with me today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jesse Hill, and I'm the president of Tier 3 IT Solutions. And today is going to be a little bit different than normal. It's a little bit more of I guess, a live demonstration, bit of a workshop style discussion around how you can leverage some of the AI tools that are available to you in your business to help design, I want to say, starting points for computer use policies, AI acceptable use policies, and you could expand it into greater areas of the business around policy making. And I want to stress that we are not HR professionals, we are not lawyers. The tools that we're going to use also shouldn't be necessarily trusted as those experts in those fields. So we want to use what's generated today as a starting point or a guideline for you in your business. As we go through today, I'd like to get any questions or anything you may have. So if you have something you want to bring up, throw it in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll do my best to pay attention to that along the way as well. All right. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive into this a little bit. So just give me a moment to click over here. Get some of these other windows up. All right. So as we're going to be talking about AI and how you can leverage it on this particular use case, the first thing that I wanted to maybe start off really quickly with was just to touch on realistically the three primary platforms that most businesses are used to using. As you can see on my screen here, I've got the ChatGPT page logged in. If you are unfamiliar with ChatGPT, there's a couple things, first of all to note. Depending which plan you're on, you've got the option to choose, which model you're using for those. And also down here, and it's kind of hidden by that button, there's an option here where you can click and you can look at your settings. The first thing I like to make sure that everybody understands is that ChatGPT, Google Gemini, some of these other platforms, they are by nature, kind of open source platforms, meaning the information that you are putting into here could be used as part of their training data. So you want to be really careful that you're not sharing anything that is sensitive or confidential in any way. And so with ChatGPT, you always want to go and double check in your settings under data controls. And there's this option here that says improve the model for everyone. You'll notice mine is already set to turn off, and the ChatGPT business apparently now automatically disables that training. So this means that the information that I put into the prompts is not going to be consumed and used to dictate responses to other people that may be using the platform. So we want to make sure that that is turned off. Now in Google Gemini, I went through and I was looking for the same settings. I admittedly don't use Gemini a whole lot. And what I found in here was that when you go to the activity, this is the part where we want to look. And you'll notice that it is set to on to keep the activity. And when I looked further into changing this setting, under the important notes, it says if you're using Google Gemini within Google Workspace with a business or school account, your data is, and I want to point this out, generally not used for training. So I went through, I actually wasn't able to turn that setting off within Google Gemini. And so I want to just be a little bit aware of that, before we use that. And then the third platform is going to be Microsoft Copilot. Now, by nature, Microsoft Copilot is a kind of closed environment. It's running the ChatGPT engine on the back end, but it also has access to the data that's available within your Microsoft 365 tenant, and so it is meant to be more of a closed system. So that being said, they all have strengths. They all have use cases and things that they're particularly good at. And there are many other platforms than the ones that we've kind of noted here. The reason I have the three of them up will come up a little bit later, but ultimately, we want you to explore each of them, learn how they can help you, and hopefully lead you to make some good decisions within your business around streamlining operations and using AI. So with that being said, what we wanted to do today was give a little bit of a demonstration about how you can use these tools to get you on your path to the starting point for the types of policies that you might want to have in your business around technology use. We will share this document with you afterwards, but I've got this Word document going here. And in my preparation for today's session, I actually leveraged AI in a number of ways. I went in and described in one of the platforms what it was that we were trying to do. And I asked it to help design the prompts that we want to use for today. So you can see, and I'm not going to read all of this to you, but because there's a lot of text. I think you can see we have 22 pages of content in here. So the first thing is you're going to help me draft a starter AI and IT policies for my business. We want to make a point, we want to use plain language and avoid citing specific laws. One of my big unlocks in leveraging AI tools is this particular statement here. Ask me 5 questions, one at a time, to refine your work before drafting anything. We also want to produce a business summary that we're going to use and keep the outputs practical for a small business. And so you can see here the question topics. We want to, first of all, because we're going to be asking it to help us write some policy, we want it to learn a little bit about us, who we are, the type of industry we're in, those types of things. Any descriptions about sensitive data that we might handle. What systems we're using, our current security standards, what our risk tolerance is. And from this, I'm telling the AI tool the output that I want is a business profile summary, some policy drafting assumptions, the short list of the top 10 risks to address, a reusable set of placeholders that I can edit. So I'm just going to take and copy all of this out. I'm going to pop back over to Gemini, and I'm just going to drop that in here. And it'll come back and it'll say, start with question 1 now. So as I instructed it, it has come back and it's asked me the first question about my business. Rather than bore you all watching me type this, I have prepared my responses to this. And so you would do the same, where you would give it your company information so that it can use that to answer the questions and move through it. The next question is about what types of sensitive data do we handle? And this is something that I want you to really think about, because you're going to have operational data, you might have intellectual property, you might have, as you can see, client information, health information, financial, you have employees, so you're going to have probably some payroll and other types of information around those as well. So I'm going to take my prepared response and put it in here, where some of the things that we've identified that we have access to are usernames and passwords, administrative access, all of those types of things. The next thing I instructed it was to ask us about the types of devices that we use. And this is a good point for you to kind of recognize that, cybersecurity, really one of the first things that you need is a good inventory of devices, software, cloud solutions, um, mobile devices, tablets, all of those types of things. So for the purposes of today, again, I had my response ready to go. It's now asking me about our security standards and things that we are doing to help protect our organization, our digital assets, and all of that. And I hope I'm not going too quick here. As I said, a lot of this I had pre-prepared. The interesting parts, I think, come a little bit later. And so we just want to show you the process that you would go through and make sure that you have some context of how to put these responses in. So the last of the first questions is our risk tolerance and workflow. How strict do we want to be? Who should be approving these tools and those types of things. So my final of the first 5 responses. So we can see that it is starting the business profile summary. It's taking the information that I provided it. It's building that in. We've taken some of the information and it said, oh, you're in Canada, so you need to be compliant with Canadian privacy principles. You have a moderate to high maturity because of some of the verbiage and terminology that we're using. We have a department that is responsible for enforcing these policies, et cetera, et cetera. It then goes down and identifies that some of the top 10 risks that we likely face as an IT services provider. If you happen to be a construction company or an oil and gas business, or you work in financial services, your top 10 risks are likely going to be different than what we would have in here. So it goes through. This first one is really just that collecting of data for it to begin, and it asks us the question: would you like me to begin drafting the acceptable use policy first, or would you like to prefer the general IT security? So let's start with acceptable use. And we'll see that it has gone ahead and started drafting the policy for us. Now, what I have started in that Word document is it says we're starting with the a starter acceptable use policy. And I'm just looking here. It looks like it actually gave me different prompts this time than what I did earlier. So I'm going to back up a step, because it outright asked me, would you like me to begin drafting, or would you prefer to start with the general? And it gave me different prompts than what I had received earlier. So I'm going to go back and tell it that I want it to draft the starter acceptable use policy. Again, I want it to ask me 5 questions one at a time. I want it to use the business profile that I had provided. And I'm going to change this to above. We want it to be plain, practical, 1 to 2 pages. We want it to include all of these different kind of components. Oh, I do have it below. And then I'm including the business profile summary above. Sorry, guys. So we're going to take this. We've got the 5 questions there. we'll start with question 1. So I instructed it the types of questions that we wanted to ask. We're going to start around personal use, and it wants us to know, like, how do we feel about people using the computers we provide them for things that are not strictly business related. We believe that personal use should be limited, and so we'll drop that response in here. Now it's asking about prohibited activities. And I'll tell you all, it's so interesting working through these, particularly live. I could actually show you using the exact same prompts side by side in Gemini that I've received different outputs and different questions from Gemini each time I've gone through this. So we want to avoid unauthorized software use and risky activities noted. So of course we're going to just drop that in here. And all we're really doing at this point, again, you would be, as you're working through this, you would be thinking about each of these responses, filling in, your perspective on it. I want to point out also that with all of these tools, you now have the option where you can type a response. You can also use a microphone and dictate the response to it. So I'll give you an example where I used that recently was I was working to design a presentation, and I had ChatGPT interview me, and I would listen to it, and then I would respond and dictate my response back to it. So if that's a more natural way for you to express your opinion or perspective on a topic rather than typing, then that might be something you want to consider as well. So we're getting down here, question 4, it's asking us, who's authorized to represent us? Do we want to include screenshots about posting, work activity, and any of those types of things? And one of the things that I did here, and I'll pop over, no, I closed it, was I made a point of saying, we have a social media policy, and it's pasted below. It should answer these questions. So when we look at my response to question number 4, it's quite a bit longer here. Now, there's a couple ways that you can use this. One is you can take and paste this type of information into a chat. You also, in these platforms, are now getting the ability to build a company knowledge base or library where you would feed it those types of documents. So core values, policies, company philosophies, any of those types of things that help to define who you are and how you communicate with outside parties. And it will use that information to modify the output that you get from the platforms. So we get down to question 5. How should we define the balance between their privacy and your security oversight? And again, we've got a response here that we say, we have tools that give us visibility. Again, my perspective is that the resources we're giving our employees are tools for them to do their jobs. There's no expectation of privacy on company-owned assets. So once we respond, to question number 5, it then is going to give us that computer use policy. Now, in this particular conversation thread, it had given us a version a little bit earlier. We could go back and we could compare them side by side and see what kinds of changes it made after we've answered those last 5 questions. But obviously, for the purposes of our time, it might be a little challenging to do. But we can see, as a starting point, it gives us a little brief overview of the purpose, the scope that it applies to all employees and contractors, and we can see it's left in some placeholders here covering all our devices. The highlighted items that it's picked up. We should only be using the devices and software for business use. The company owns all of this. We have to have a security first mindset, only using our authorized tools. What are the explicitly prohibited activities? How are we monitoring, and what's the expectations of privacy? What are the roles and responsibilities, the enforcement? And it would give us a little checklist, some items here that we want everybody to adhere to as they're using the computers. It gives us a couple of notes about things that we might want to customize. And, importantly, any policy that we're going to create, we need to, educate our staff, train them on it, make sure that they're all aware, that we can answer any questions, that we are, selling them on the importance of, in this case, maybe some restrictions that they're not used to having before. So one of the things, again, I started off with was I wanted to make sure that we all understood we are not HR professionals, we are not legal professionals. And so what I did was I took the initial output that it gave me and I, put it into Word, and, I read through it, and everything that is highlighted in yellow is something that I changed, added, removed, modified. I only highlighted our company name once because that just carries through everywhere. And so again, the purpose of this part of the exercise is to make sure that your initial draft that you're getting is headed in the right direction, right? We don't want it to be perfect quite yet because there's a review process that we're going to go through, kind of next. But the reason that I highlighted this was I wanted you to see that, along the way, like there was something in almost every single, bullet point that I felt needed a little bit more of our flavor, a little bit more of our, specificity around things. And so, I went through and I made all those changes. Now, a lot of people, I think, at this point would say, okay, we now have this document. Let's take it, let's, formalize it, let's train our people. And I picked this up at a different conference just about a week or two ago. Somebody asked, which platform should I use? And the presenter made a really good point. And the point was that every single one of these, AI platforms, these large language models, they have a different algorithm, they have a different data set, they have a different kind of direction that they're leaning and tendencies and, blind spots and problems and all of those types of things. And so the recommendation was to take what we just got, change the prompt. So now what we want to do is we want to instruct a different AI platform as follows, to say you are an independent second opinion reviewer. I'm using multiple AI tools to draft starter AI policies for small business. And, we're saying we recognize, just like with our team, we know that certain people, are good at one thing and, less so at another. We're saying, hey, we want you to check for blind spots, catch mistakes. Is there anything that's unclear in here, right? We're not trying to make a perfect legal or HR document, and we want to focus on, these particular areas. Again, these boundaries were designed by AI. I told it I was going to do this. It said, don't give us legal advice. Don't claim compliance. Don't invent facts about the company, tools, or environment. And if it includes technical claims, treat them skeptically. Gives it the process. Again, ask me 5 clarifying questions, produce your review. So I thought that this was one of the interesting parts of kind of leveraging AI and the large language models is to, as you can see, go through, create this kind of fact-checking process. And I'm scrolling through very quickly, but obviously, when we get down, this is my copy and paste again of the existing policy so that we can see it all in line. And I am going to go through and copy this, and I'm going to run into a different platform. And in this case, let's go over to Copilot, and I'm going to drop that instruction into Microsoft Copilot. We can see it's quite a lengthy post. And we're now going to get into the, essentially the quality control, fact checking, error finding component. And you can see that it's going through and it's giving us a summary of what it's finding. So it read the executive summary. It's solid, but it mixes acceptable use with AI and MSP stuff. Several statements are too absolute. So items like no personal use, no expectation of privacy. And so this AI's perspective is that might be unrealistic or risky to enforce. Some of the controls are too vague. The roles, are not clear enough. The checklist is good, but could be more actionable. Look at this. There's potentially, some things here. Personal use is prohibited. Is that really, reasonable? And boom, boom, boom. And so you can see that when we put it in here and asked it the question in a different way, we're going to start to get, kind of a different perspective. Again, like I said, just as we would if we had a different, a second person looking at things. So we can see here it's given us some suggestions. Instead of saying, no personal use, it's saying limited personal use, as long as it doesn't interfere with work, violate security, or involve personal cloud services. And so again, as you go through and read all of these, it's going to cause you, I think, to reconsider maybe some of the structure of your policy. You might look at that and say, well, you know what? I don't think that we want to give this freedom. We have to stick with no personal use. Well, that's a decision that you as a business person is going to make. And you can tell the AI what you want to do. So as we come down, we then see we have a revised policy, and it's going to give us its kind of structure and design and recommendations and changes around all of those things. I'm just going to pop it back over here. I then took the policy that it created and did exactly the same thing, where I said, okay, I've now taken policy 1 out of Gemini. I gave it to Microsoft Copilot. I'm now going to take the policy out of Copilot. I'm going to go in, I'm going to reread it in Word. I'm going to make any changes. I'm going to go back to what my first policy from Gemini had. The things that I wanted to absolutely keep are going to stay in here. And I'm going to repeat the exact same process where I'm going to copy this and I'm going to drop it into, potentially into a third LLM, into ChatGPT, and ask it one more time to be my second set of eyes reviewing this policy. So this particular part of the process is obviously more time consuming, I think, than what most people are leading us to believe, the right way to use AI is, or the magic of what AI will offer. In most cases, what I've seen is They go through step number one with Gemini. It gets it to ask you 5 questions, and then boom, we have a policy. We're going to use it. I think that the real value here is a couple of things. So first of all, when we got the first policy out of Gemini, we put a human review process in where I dropped it into Word, I read it, I made my edits. I then, handed it off to a second platform and asked it for its perspective. I got an output back. I made my edits, and now I'm getting a third perspective on it, and I'm going to then have a final comparison of what did I get in step 1, step 2, and step 3. I'm going to take the things I like out of each one of those kind of steps, and ultimately have something that we as a management or leadership team are able to review. If we need to get any HR professionals, legal professionals, anything like that to look at them, we'll do that. And then hopefully we're ready to roll it out and train our staff and start using that. So this was for policy number 1. The thing that I also recognize is that as we build more of these policies, when we think about the 10 policies you might want to build for your business: acceptable use, bring your own device, password management, cloud security, on and on and on. You can use each of the policies as a reference for the next one that you're going to build. So we could take this particular chat, and let's just assume that this one is correct. We could then say, I'd like to build an AI acceptable use policy. Use everything you've learned above. Ask me 5 questions, one at a time. To get started. It will then use all of the input that I've put in and all of the context that it has from that previous conversation that we just finished. And we're back to step number 1 of answering the questions so that it can build a tailored starting point for a policy for our team. Okay, so that was everything that I wanted to run through and show you. And I know we went through a lot. As I mentioned at the beginning, I will send out a copy of the prompts to everybody that was here today. If you have any questions about how to use these tools or these platforms, open to hearing anything from you. If you want to throw it in the chat or the Q&A, we can do that. Or if you want to reach out to us by email, or by phone, we can do that. I hope this was helpful, and always appreciate any feedback that you might have. So, I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anybody has any questions or anything specific they want to talk about. Otherwise, I'll just say thanks for hopping on. Really appreciate you joining me, and I hope this was helpful. So thanks, everybody. Again, if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat and we can connect there. All right, I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so I'm going to just close this one off. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.